Hello my quilting friends! Leah Day here with a new video for the Machine Quilting Block Party. So we have quilted many different pieces for our quilt and now it's time to start putting them together. This is a technique called Quilt-as-you-Go, and it basically means that everything's been kind of quilted in separate pieces and now we're going to put it together to create our final quilt. So in this video we're going to learn how to prep up our blocks and make them really easy to connect together. Here I have lots of pretty things quilted up and ready to connect together. The first step is to draw an outline around your block that is the size that you're going to cut it down to. So for the blocks, these are going to be cut down to 14.5 inches square. So I centered up a big ruler here and marked a 14.5 inch square right on the surface. Now I'm going to do something called a victory lap. Whatever I measured and marked, I'm going to stitch right on that line. Then I'm going to quilt inside of it, maybe about 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to quilt around it again with the third line between the first two. Now what this is going to do is it's going to stabilize the edge of the block and just make it much easier to trim down accurately and piece all of these pieces together. Refer to your sashings and cornerstones pattern to know the size of the square or rectangle that you need to mark over your sashing rectangles or your cornerstone squares. Now I'm going to take this to the machine. I'll show you how to do that victory lap stitching. So I've already stitched right on that marked line and then I stitched within it, and you can see it's a little bit wider than 1/8 of an inch, but obviously less than 1/4 of an inch. Basically we just want to build up stitching here so this edge is nice and dense and easy to connect to our binding. So I'm doing this in free motion simply because I'm fast, and you can see I can just push the block through the machine really quickly and buzz through it. You could also do this with your walking foot, and if you wanted to you could adjust your stitch length to be nice and big. This stitching is going to be covered up completely, so please do not worry about it. Don't worry about the thread color and don't worry about the size of your stitches. It's going to be covered up entirely by your binding, but it's very important. If we were to try and cut these blocks down and bind them together without this stitching, it would be very challenging. And it would be challenging because this edge is so loosey-goosey. Even right now, with only 2 layers of thread, I can see that it would just want to stretch and kind of do its own thing. It would have a mind of its own. By adding this extra stitching, we're making this edge nice and dense, and that's going to be easier to piece with it whenever we add our binding to connect our blocks together. So it's a necessary step. It's an easy one for people to overlook, and it's certainly one that might be a little confusing, but just trust me, it's really going to make a big difference. It's going to make our connection and Quilt-as-you-Go process much easier and faster. So I'm coming up here, and the nice thing is you don't even have to tie off and bury your thread tails. I just stitch back over it a little bit and lift my needle, and I just clip these thread tails off real short. And then you'll be ready to cut your block down to size. So if you remember, we marked a 14.5 inch square on this block. Now we're going to trim it up to 14.5 inches square. So I pulled out a really big ruler. This is a big 16.5 inch square. You want something big enough that can cut this down all at once rather than trying to use multiple rulers to cut it down. So I've lined this up, centered it up, and now I'm going to trim off one side at a time. Now you might be wondering, okay, so we marked and stitched 14.5 inches. Aren't we cutting off that first line of the victory lap? And the truth is, we're not actually. As we did this line of stitching, this has shrunk slightly. And so what I find most often is that those 3 lines of stitching usually end up within the 14.5 inch mark just fine. And even if you do cut it off, it's not a big deal because this edge is going to be covered up completely. So even if you trim off, let's say you nick a little bit of that outermost line, and clearly my rotary cutter is dull here, guys. But even if you trim off a little bit of this outermost line, it's not going to be a big deal because you've got 2 other lines of stitching that are going to hold it securely together and ensure that we have a really nice experience binding these pieces together.
So as I center this up now, I have 2 straight edges, and I'm just lining this up at the 14.5-inch mark, down and over. That looks good. And then I make my cut. So just take your time with this process. It is a lot of layers, so obviously you might have to make multiple passes with your rotary cutter. Mine's running a little dull on me today, so you can see I'm having to make multiple passes, and that's okay. You just want to trim it up nice and square and make sure that all the pieces are cut the correct size. And this is just like all math with quilting. It depends on the pieces being the right size and shape, so that way they go together easily. So that's how you trim up your quilt block, and you're going to trim up your sashing rectangles and cornerstone squares just the exact same way. In the next video, we will learn how to bind and connect these pieces together using binding strips. Now, speaking of binding, the next step is to prepare your binding fabric. So refer to your pattern so that way you know how much yardage to work with, and you'll want to pre-wash it and starch it. And then I usually starch this a second time. So I will starch from the front and then press from the back, and then I'll spray starch again on the back and press from the front. And what this does is it just ensures that the fabric is super, super stiff, and it's very easy to cut accurately because we need to cut nice, long, straight strips from this fabric, and we want to make sure they have very little stretch. So please take the time to do that. It will make every part of the connecting process much easier if your binding strips, if that fabric has been starched and pressed this way. So once you get your fabric prepped up, you're going to be cutting your strips. You're going to need 1-inch strips for the back of the quilt and 1.5-inch strips for the front of the quilt. And for all of the 1.5-inch strips, all these front binding pieces, you want to take them and fold them in half just like this so they become 3/4 of an inch wide. So refer to your pattern to know the sizes and shapes to cut, and make sure to take your time as you press this in half. I usually fold it in half, and then I take my iron and I just press with a hot, dry iron, and then just slide it down my pressing board so that way it's really flat and crisply pressed. If you don't take the time to do this, if you don't take the time to starch, then you're not going to get a very crisp fold, and you're going to be losing space in this binding strip. So take your time, get everything prepped up, and in the next video, we'll learn how to start connecting our pieces together.
So that's it for this video. I really hope that you enjoyed learning this first step to quilt as you go. It's a fun technique, and it's something that you can do so much with. And the best thing is, it really keeps your quilts manageable on a small home sewing machine. Now, if you have any questions about this process, definitely ask in the comments below. I'm here to help you learn more about machine quilting and making beautiful quilts. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with your friends and subscribe to my channel on YouTube so you don't miss out on the next part of this video coming out soon. Until next time, let's go quilt.